No one ever truly loved you. This is one of those truths we don't dare say out loud, but feel deep in our hearts every time we lie down at night and the silence weighs heavy. No one ever loved you completely. They only loved what you showed, what was easy to like, what didn't bother them, what fit into what they expected of you. The rest you hid, swallowed, pruned, and you learned to live like this, surrounded by people, but alone inside. Carl Jung already knew the answer to that, and it's not easy to hear. From an early age, you were conditioned to believe that to deserve love, you had to earn it. You had to become someone worthy, someone good, someone right. You learned to smile even when angry, to help even when tired, to agree even when disagreeing. And every time someone praised your kindness, it reinforced the lesson in you. Only then am I worthy of being loved. But there's a price to being only half loved, and you've probably felt it. A loneliness so deep that not even a few hugs can touch it. A void no one can fill. A silent fear that the day they discover who you truly are, they'll leave. Jung called this person the mask we wear to survive in the world. The mask the world learns to love, because it's easier to love a character than to face the raw truth of who we are. And why does this happen? Because they too, your friends, your family, your relationships, also wear their own masks. Everyone is afraid of who they are inside. Everyone has a dark side they deny and hide. And when you unintentionally let your truth out, your anger, your sadness, your need, they don't know how to handle it. They retreat. Not because you don't deserve love, but because looking at your truth forces them to look at their own. Jung said, "What we do not face within ourselves, we will encounter as destiny." And perhaps this is your fate today, repeating relationships in which you are only half loved, because you also never allowed yourself to love yourself completely. You spent your life sacrificing pieces of yourself to fit into other people's hearts, but each hidden piece became a chasm between you and them, because no one can love what you don't dare show yourself. And it's not your fault, it's the wound we all share. We grew up learning that parts of ourselves were too ugly, too wrong, too undesirable. So we put on an act to be accepted. But there comes a time when the soul can't take it anymore. There comes a time when you look in the mirror and ask yourself, has anyone ever loved me? Or did they just love the well-practiced mask I wore? This pain is old, collective, but unique in the way it tears you apart. And maybe you don't know it yet, but it's also an invitation. An invitation to stop and ask yourself, who would I be if I didn't need to be loved all the time? What would happen if I let the mask slip? Because only when you exist whole can someone finally love you whole. Not because you please them, not because you fit their expectations, but simply because you are. And that's rare, it's brave, it's real. And when the mask slips, even if only for a moment, something even more uncomfortable emerges. Because it's not just that no one has ever truly loved you, it's also that, deep down, you've never loved yourself completely. And this is the wound Jung forced us to stare at without looking away. What you can't accept in yourself, you hide from the world, and you wait, in the secret of your heart, for someone to come and love what you've never had the courage to touch. But how could anyone love your truth if you don't even allow yourself to get close to it? Jung called this in the shade, a hidden part of your soul, made of the emotions, desires, and impulses you've learned to despise. Everything you tried to forget to be accepted. Everything you repressed to be loved. The anger they said was ugly. The fear they said was weakness. The need they said was shame. And the shadow never disappears just because you don't look at it. It stays there, waiting. Sometimes it slips away without you noticing. In a fit of jealousy, in poorly disguised envy, in a desperate need to please. And perhaps that's what makes other people's love so fragile, because they too feel your shadow, even when you don't speak of it. They sense there's more to you than this well-behaved facade you offer. They sense an unnamed weight, a side you hide for fear of rejection. And the human instinct, as unconscious as it is cruel, is to retreat when something dark appears. This is why friendships die when you finally open up too much. This is why loves fall apart when you let your pain out. Not because people are bad, but because they too run from their own shadows, and looking at yours forces them to face theirs. Jung said no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making darkness conscious. And perhaps that's the hardest lesson life tries to teach you. No one will love your shadow for you. No one will reach out and heal the part of you you refuse to accept. It's you who needs to reach out to this forgotten side of yourself. It's you who needs to sit with it, look at it, and say, I know you exist, and yet I'm not leaving. Only then will you be ready for someone to see you whole. Because only when you come to terms with your own shadow can others stop being afraid of it too. It's a difficult path, lonely at times, but profoundly liberating. Because every piece of yourself you recover is a piece of yourself that lives again. Every part you embrace is a part that stops asking for approval from the outside. When you begin this process, even the way you look at people changes. You begin to see that everyone carries their own shadow, and this softens judgments. It opens space for compassion. It makes you finally realize that no one needs to be perfect to be worthy of love, not even you. This is the silent revolution Carl Jung invited us to undertake to embrace our full humanity. Light and darkness, strength and fragility, pride and fear. And when you do, life changes. Relationships change. And for the first time, you begin to feel like there's room in the world for you to be who you are. If these words have already sparked something within you, I invite you to continue this journey with me. Just sign up here so you don't miss any of these moments of reflection that little by little will help you find yourself and allow yourself to be found by others as well. Because even your shadow deserves to be seen and deserves to be loved. Even when you begin to approach your shadow, even when you try to show yourself fully to someone, there's still something that hangs like a veil between you and the other. An invisible veil that distorts everything you see and feel in your relationships. Jung called this projection, and it's perhaps the cruelest trap of all, because it makes you believe you're seeing the other person, when in fact, you're only seeing yourself. Think for a moment, how many times have you been hurt because someone was selfish to you, or felt wronged for not receiving what you believed you deserved? How many times have you been enchanted by someone, believing that person was perfect, almost like a savior, only to be inevitably disappointed? These extremes don't just speak about who the other person is, they speak about you. Jung said that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Because the truth is, what you can't stand in yourself, you see in others. And what you secretly dream of being, you also see in others. This is how projection works. An invisible screen over every person you cross paths with, painted with the colors of your own psyche. That's why you fall madly in love with someone who seems so complete, because you bring into them the parts of yourself you can't access. The courage, the lightness, the boldness that you yourself have repressed. That's why you deeply hate that colleague who always seems manipulative, because they remind you of your own tendency to control situations when you're insecure. And this is so unconscious that you think you're seeing the other person, but you're not. You're seeing the reflection of your own pain and desires. That's why so many friendships seem beautiful at first and become unbearable later. At first, you only saw your positive projection. The person seemed perfect, made you feel complete, but over time, reality sets in. The other person's mask slips, and you feel betrayed, as if they've changed, but they never have. What changed was your mirror, and that's also why you push away people who could do you good. Because what you see in them scares you. You see in them what you haven't yet accepted in yourself. This is the great tragedy of projection. It prevents us from seeing the other person as they truly are. It makes us demand that the other person fulfill a role that was never theirs. It turns love into a silent contract, full of expectations that no one can sustain for long. And that's not your fault, nor is it anyone else's fault. It's just the way the human psyche works while unconscious. The solution: bring awareness to every intense emotion someone awakens in you. Ask, why does this touch me so much? Why does this person irritate me so much? Why do they fascinate me so much? What part of me is trying to be seen through them? When you make this move, something changes. You begin to see the other person more clearly. You realize that they are human beings, with their lights and shadows, who didn't come to save you or carry your pain. They aren't here to be perfect or responsible for your happiness. And that's liberating, because it takes a weight off your relationships. It takes a weight off the other person, and it takes a weight off you. You stop demanding that others be flawless mirrors. You stop hating them for reflecting what you don't like about yourself. You stop idealizing that as if they were the solution to your incompleteness. And then for the first time, you begin to truly see the other person, with all their flaws, all their truths, all their imperfect beauties. Jung invited us to do this, to collect the projections we spread throughout the world and bring them back in, to rescue the parts of ourselves we've given to others, to finally be whole. And when you start seeing people as they truly are, and not as you wish them to be, love changes its tone. It stops being a mirror and becomes an encounter between two whole souls, no longer needing to hide behind roles or fantasies. And that's what we've always been looking for, without knowing it. And even when you begin to recognize your projections, even when you finally recognize that you're not seeing the other person as they truly are, there's still a huge obstacle between you and genuine love: the fear of intimacy. Because intimacy isn't just about being close. It's not just about sharing stories and laughing together. It's about allowing yourself to be seen completely. And that's scary. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to maintain a certain distance in relationships? How comfortable it is to remain in that safe zone, where you show just enough to avoid rejection, but never so much that you feel truly exposed. This mechanism is more common than it seems. It disguises itself as maturity, discretion, prudence, but deep down, it's fear. Fear that if the other person sees too much, they'll leave. Carl Jung said, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of others." And perhaps that's why intimacy is so difficult, because it's a two-way street to let someone see you for who you are. You also need to have the courage to see them as they are. And when these two truths collide, when neither party can hide their cracks anymore, that's when most retreat. How many times have you felt like saying what you really felt, but held back? How many times have you tried to open your heart, to share your pain, but given up for fear of appearing weak? How many times have you needed support, but preferred to smile so as not to upset anyone? This is the invisible barrier that stands between people. We all long to be deeply known, yet at the same time, we do everything we can to avoid being completely discovered. We want love, but we're terrified of giving others the chance to not love us when they see who we are. And this manifests itself in the most banal things of everyday life. When you avoid difficult conversations, when you always play it cool so you don't cause trouble, when you become the person the other person wants you to be, when you focus on their problems so you don't have to talk about yours. The result: lukewarm relationships, friendships that never go beyond the surface, fragile bonds that seem deep but break at the first sign of truth. Because intimacy isn't just about physical proximity, it's about vulnerability. It's about having the courage to show up completely, even if it means risking rejection. It's about knowing it might hurt, but still choosing to be honest. When you open up, something changes in the relationship's dynamics. The other person feels invited to open up too, because courage is contagious. Suddenly, conversations gain a depth they didn't have before. Silences become less awkward. Connection stops being a performance and becomes a real encounter. But this doesn't happen without fear, because intimacy is risky. You never have guarantees. You never know if the person will stay or back away. But that's also why intimacy is so valuable, because it's rare. Little by little you realize it's worth it, that even when it hurts, the truth is lighter than a lie. That being seen for who you are brings much more peace than being admired for a version you invented. And when you feel that peace, when you experience that kind of bond, you understand nothing superficial can truly fulfill you. Jung reminded us that being whole isn't about being perfect. It's about accepting every part of yourself, and having the courage to offer it to others, not so they can heal, not so they'll always accept you, but because you understand that you can't love yourself halfway, and therefore you no longer want to be loved halfway either. If this reflection resonated with you, I'd like you to leave a like here. It's a simple gesture, but it shows that you also believe this is worth talking about, and that deep down, you also want to experience relationships that go beyond the surface. Because this is courage taking the first step even when you're trembling. Even when you find the strength to break through the mask, embrace the shadow, retract your projections, and open yourself to intimacy. There's still something almost invisible, yet devastating, corroding your relationships from within, the unspoken silence. That silence that slowly creeps in, heavy, suffocating, until it transforms the most promising friendship into a barren field where nothing else flourishes. You've experienced this. I know I have. That feeling that something's wrong, but no one says anything. That the conversation isn't as light anymore, but no one brings it up. That there's a hurt feeling between you, but you both pretend not to feel it. This is one of the greatest pains of human coexistence, realizing that there's a chasm between you and the other, carved by all the words you never had the courage to say. Carl Jung, always surgical when speaking of the soul, said life's biggest problems are insoluble. They are never solved, only overcome. And perhaps silence is precisely that, one of those insoluble problems, because it's not just made of fear, it's made of pride, resentment, shame. You don't speak because you don't want to appear weak, or because you're afraid of the other person's reaction, or because you think they should know for themselves, without you having to explain. And then you swallow, and wait. And each swallowed word becomes a brick in this invisible wall you build together. At first it seems like little, a nuisance here, a small frustration there. But over time the unsaid things build up. The wound that could be healed with an apology turns into chronic resentment. The compliment you didn't have the courage to give turns into pointless distancing. The pain you couldn't share turns into anger. And no one realizes exactly when the friendship stopped being alive. It just gets colder, emptier, more formal, until the day one of you stops trying. This silence isn't just the absence of words. It's the absence of courage. It's the refusal to risk discomfort to save something worthwhile. It's the false peace that only exists because no one dares speak the truth. Because the truth, even painful truth, brings us closer. But silence, that heavy silence, pushes us away. Jung said that for something new to be born, we must first allow the old to die. And perhaps what needs to die is not the relationship itself, but this pattern of fear and silence that has been slowly killing it. Talking is difficult. It always will be. But it's also the only way to transform. And I missed you can open doors that seemed closed. A that hurt me can heal old wounds. A thank you can rekindle an affection that once seemed extinguished. Of course, the other person won't always respond the way you'd like. Sometimes, even the truth won't be enough to save someone. But it's still worth it. Because by speaking up, you honor what you feel. You position yourself in the world as a whole person. And that is already a gift, for yourself and for the other person. The silence that kills isn't that of comfortable pauses, of glances that say more than words. This is another kind of silence, fertile, intimate, safe. What kills is the silence of fear, of omission, of pride. This is a slow poison, so realize maybe you still have time. There's still someone on the other side of that wall waiting for you to say what's stuck in your throat. There's still room for a true encounter, as long as you both find the true words. Because no friendship survives on coexistence alone. No love survives on intention alone. Living relationships are nourished by truth. And even if it hurts, even if it brings tears, even if it requires humility, speaking is always worth more than remaining silent. Ultimately, no one ever regrets saying what needed to be said, but everyone regrets, sooner or later, having remained silent for too long. And even if you finally manage to break the silence and speak your mind, there's still something, almost imperceptible, that continues to corrode your bonds from within. Unspoken expectations. What you secretly demand of others without even realizing it. What you hope for but never dare ask for. Maybe you've experienced this: a friendship that seems solid begins to crumble, not for lack of affection, but because somewhere along the way, you began to expect the other person to be more than they could be. You wanted them to understand your pain. You wanted them to always be there when you needed them. You wanted them to be strong for you, even when they themselves were falling apart. And you said nothing. You just waited, and you were hurt when he didn't deliver what you never asked for. Carl Jung spoke about the illusion of control we create over others. He said, knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of others. And that's exactly it. When you don't face your own shortcomings, you end up dumping them on someone else. You expect them to carry a burden that was never theirs. That's why so many relationships end with a bitter feeling of ingratitude. Because in the silence of expectations, we create invisible contracts that no one ever signed. I've been there for you so many times. Why aren't you here for me now? This pain often arises more from the fantasy we harbor than from reality. This is the trap: confusing love with obligation, confusing presence with duty. And when we realize the other person doesn't meet our expectations, it's easy to fall into the trap of resentment. We begin to see them as selfish, cold, and indifferent. But we rarely look within and ask, did I tell the other person what I needed? Could I have taken care of it myself? Because no one has the obligation to save us. No one has the duty to fill the spaces we ourselves refuse to inhabit. The problem isn't having needs. We all have them. The problem is turning them into burdens we place on the shoulders of those we love, as if love were a service to heal our wounds. And that doesn't mean people shouldn't be there for you. Of course they should. Of course affection, support, and companionship are the essence of any healthy human relationship. But there's a huge difference between being supported and being sustained, between receiving care and demanding that the other person heal something only you can handle. Therefore, little by little, you must learn to disarm your own expectations, to see the other person not as a remedy for your pain, but as someone who, like you, also has pain, limitations, and shadows. When you do this, something changes in the way you relate to one another. You begin to see the beauty of what the other person can offer, without getting hung up on what they can't. You stop demanding perfection. You stop expecting the other person to guess what you yourself haven't had the courage to name. And in this space, something lighter is born, something more honest. Relationships where everyone can be who they are, without the constant pressure of having to meet invisible expectations. Because in the end, no one is obligated to fulfill your life. No one should be molded to fit your needs. And no one should be punished for failing to save you from yourself. When you realize this, you give back to others the freedom to be, and you also give back to yourself the responsibility for your own peace. And it is there, in this open terrain, that true love can finally blossom. Because now it is not born of need, but of choice. It is not born of obligation, but of presence. It is not born of an imaginary debt, but of an encounter between two wholes. And only then is it possible to love someone not for what they do for you, but simply for who they are. Even when you can acknowledge your expectations, give others space to be who they are, and take responsibility for yourself, there's an even deeper, almost invisible wound that insists on bleeding. The feeling of not being enough to be loved. This is perhaps the silent root of it all, and it's also the scariest to face head on. How many times have you felt like you needed to do more, be more, give more? How many times have you found yourself mentally reliving an encounter, trying to identify a moment where you could have been better? How many times have you walked away, not because the other person lacked love, but because you didn't believe you were worthy of receiving it? This wound isn't born in the present. It's born from the past, from disappointed glances, from criticism disguised as care, from the silences that made you believe you didn't deserve to be seen. Little by little, You internalized the idea that you needed to deserve every gesture of affection, that you needed to earn every bit of love, and this has shaped the way you relate to each other to this day. You give too much of yourself to prove your worth. You tolerate too much to avoid losing the other person, and you hide too much to avoid upsetting them. All this to avoid facing your greatest fear, the fear that if the other person saw your full self, they wouldn't stay. Jung said, "What we deny in ourselves enslaves us, and denying your own dignity is one of the cruelest prisons you can build for yourself, because as long as you believe you need to become someone else to deserve love, you will never feel truly loved." This feeling of inadequacy also prevents you from receiving it. Every time someone offers you affection, you become suspicious. Every time someone supports you, you think it's out of pity or obligation. Every time someone stands by you, you wonder how long it will last. And so you go through relationships where you never allow yourself to rest, always alert, always anxious, always trying to prove your place in the other person's life. But the truth is, you never needed to earn love, because true love isn't negotiable. It's not a bargaining chip. It's not a reward for good behavior. It's above all recognition. Recognition of your humanity, complete, imperfect, real. And maybe it's time you stop seeing yourself through the eyes of those who never knew how to see you. Maybe it's time to realize that being enough isn't about being perfect, but about being whole. When you start accepting this, something changes inside you. Relationships change. You no longer bend to fit in. You no longer beg for attention in places where there's none to receive. You no longer punish yourself for being who you are. You begin to feel like you already have everything you need to be worthy of affection. And you realize that anyone who doesn't see this was never worthy of your heart. This is one of the hardest truths to accept, but it's also the most liberating. You don't have to become someone else to be loved. You just need to have the courage to be who you already are. And that doesn't mean everyone will stay, because not everyone has the maturity to love someone who doesn't diminish themselves. But the ones who stay, those are the ones worth it. I'd also like you to leave a comment. When was the last time you felt like you weren't enough? And how does that still resonate with you today? Sometimes, just by sharing that pain, we begin to realize we're not alone. Because in the end, none of us are. And there comes a point when you begin to realize that it's not just about being seen, accepted, or loved by others. There's an even more intimate and challenging choice you need to make, to honor who you've become along this journey. The courage to walk away, not out of pride, not out of revenge, but out of self-love. How many times have you stayed in relationships that no longer nourished you, just to avoid feeling alone? How many times have you persisted in friendships that drained you, just to avoid being the first to leave? How many times have you silenced your own needs to maintain the illusion that there was still something there? This is one of life's hardest tests, understanding when it's time to stay and when it's time to leave. Because leaving hurts. Even if the space was already cold, even if the reciprocity had already disappeared, even if the bond was only a thread of memory, leaving always hurts. But it hurts more to stay in places that no longer accommodate who you are today. Jung said that there is no awakening of consciousness without pain, and part of that pain comes precisely from the act of letting go. Letting go of the people you thought would be by your side forever. Letting go of the relationships that can no longer keep up with your truth. Letting go of the version of yourself that would accept anything just to not be alone. It's hard to look at someone you've shared so much with and realize that you now speak different languages, that silences no longer comfort, that encounters no longer warm, that the other's presence, however familiar, no longer fulfills and sometimes even hurts. And yet it's common to cling to it, because deep down, you remember what it once was. You try to rescue it, try to relive it, try to ignore the signs. But this only prolongs the wound. When you finally accept that you can't give anymore, that there's nothing left to learn there, nothing left to give, nothing left to receive, a bitter but necessary relief emerges, a sigh that says he arrives. And that doesn't mean there's no love lost. It doesn't mean that person wasn't important. It doesn't mean you didn't mutually transform as you walked together. It just means the cycle has been completed. Because love to be true needs space to grow. It needs truth to flourish. And when space no longer exists, when truth is no longer possible, remaining is just insisting on a comfortable lie. The act of withdrawing is a silent gesture of respect for yourself and for the other. It's admitting that you're no longer in the same place within yourself. It's giving yourself the chance to start over, and giving the other the freedom to be who they need to be now, even if that no longer fits you. And it's at that moment that you realize the loneliness that comes after is much less painful than the loneliness you felt even when you were accompanied. Because now at least you're true to yourself. And the truth is, life has a curious way of filling the spaces you courageously free up. But to do so, you must first have the strength to let go. It's an act of maturity, not to expect everyone to stay forever, not to force anyone to fit in, not to beg to be seen where there are no longer any eyes willing to see you. Because sometimes, true love is precisely knowing how to walk away when there's no longer any reciprocity. It's knowing how to honor the story without having to prolong the ending. It's having the humility to be grateful for what was and the courage to accept that it will never be again. And in that silence of someone leaving, there's a new, almost unfamiliar peace, a strange sense of wholeness, as if you finally learned to honor yourself. This is the hardest and most beautiful lesson Jung left us. We cannot force anyone to love us, but we can always choose to love ourselves enough to leave when necessary. And when you do that, you make room for one day, who knows, true love to find you again. Once you have the courage to leave, something unexpected happens. For the first time in a long time, you find yourself standing before yourself, with no one to soothe the silence or distract you from your pain. At first, it can feel like a desert. You walk inside yourself and don't recognize the terrain, as if you've spent too many years trying to be everything to others, and being so little to yourself. It's uncomfortable, it's strange, but it's also necessary. Because leaving isn't just leaving the other person, it's returning to yourself, and this return is the most important part of the entire journey. Jung said, "He who looks outside dreams, he who looks inside awakens." It's precisely now, in the space your withdrawal has opened, that you begin to see the parts of yourself you'd left behind, the memories you stifled to fit into the mold, the desires you swallowed to avoid bothering, the dreams you locked away in a drawer to be accepted. Now there's only you, and that's scary, because you still don't know who you are without all those papers. This is the time when many people try to run back to old places, old people, old patterns. It's easier to lose yourself in someone else than to walk through the desert of your own soul. It's easier to don another mask than to look at your own face. But if you resist this urge and stay with yourself, something begins to blossom, slowly at first, a faint breath of familiarity, a shy sense of belonging. And then you realize there's life inside you. There are parts no one has ever touched. There's a silent center that's always been there, just waiting for you to remember it. This is the true reunion, not with who you thought you were, but with who you always were. You start to remember what makes you feel good without an audience. The music you like to listen to alone, the scent that calms you, the words you wanted to say but never did. You realize you've always had a home within yourself, but you spent so much time trying to live in others that you forgot. This process isn't linear. Sometimes you'll still feel lost. You'll miss what you left behind. You'll be afraid of not finding anyone new. But with each step toward yourself, you become more whole. And being whole is different from being complete. Because no one is complete. Being whole is simply not abandoning yourself anymore. It's knowing that, even if people come or go, you remain with yourself. This integrity begins to transform everything. Choices change. Relationships change. Priorities change. You no longer accept any affection just to avoid being alone. You no longer bend over backward to be accepted by those who don't see you. You no longer try to fit into places where your heart suffocates. And that doesn't mean you don't love anymore. Quite the opposite. It means you now love without losing yourself. You love without denying yourself. You love without leaving pieces of yourself scattered in an attempt to be worthy. This reunion is one of the most transformative experiences ever. It restores the feeling that there was always value in who you are, even when no one noticed, that you were already worthy before any approval. And when you find yourself again, the world feels new too. Because now you see people not as saviors or judges, but as travelers, each with their own wounds, their own masks, their own shadows. And that gives you compassion. You no longer see yourself as anyone's victim, nor as anyone's debtor, only as someone who has finally learned to come home. And maybe, just maybe, that's what true love has always wanted from you, for you to arrive at your meeting with it in one piece. And then when you finally find yourself again, when you no longer bend to be loved or run away to avoid being hurt, something rare and profoundly human begins to happen. You discover the privilege of being whole and being seen as such, not for the masks you wore, not for the roles you played, but for who you truly are, with all your imperfections, your cracks, your light, and your shadow. It is in this state that true friendship, true love, and true connection find space to emerge. Because now you are no longer looking for someone to complete you, to heal your wounds, or to erase your fear of being alone. You no longer enter relationships with outstretched hands, begging to be saved from yourself. Now you enter with open hands, ready to share who you are, not to beg for who you were not. This is a state of grace that's difficult to describe, because suddenly you realize you've always been enough, that you didn't need to mutilate yourself emotionally to fit into other people's hearts, that you didn't need to be silent, to bow down, to lose yourself, that no one has ever had the power to give or take away what was already yours from the beginning, the dignity of being yourself. Jung said, "What you resist persists, what you accept transforms." And accepting yourself whole is the greatest gift you can give yourself, because everything that comes after is a consequence of that. Now you see who deserves to stay and who no longer has a place. You no longer feel the need to cling to any presence, just to avoid feeling your own absence. You discover the taste of solitude and the difference between being alone and being lonely. And curious as life is, when you no longer need anyone to be whole, the right people finally arrive, and they don't come to complete you, but to walk beside you. Not to heal your wounds, but to honor the scars you've already learned to love. Not to save you, but to share the journey with someone who has already learned to save themselves. This awareness changes everything, because from now on you no longer trade your peace to keep anyone around. You no longer beg to be seen. You no longer accept less than you deserve. And above all, you're no longer afraid to show who you are. This doesn't mean you'll never get hurt again, that no one will betray you, hurt you, or disappoint you. Life is still life, but now you no longer build your dignity on what others do or don't do. It comes from within. And so every genuine relationship that arises from now on will be met with gratitude, not neediness. You'll cherish every genuine look, every sincere hug, every gesture without ulterior motives, because now you understand how rare it is to be seen in your entirety. Few people make it this far. Few have the courage to cross the desert, to look at their own shadow, to recollect their projections, to break the silence, to let go of expectations, to leave when necessary, and to find yourself again. So feel privileged to have walked this road thus far. Not because I brought you these truths, but because you had the courage to receive them. And if these words ever resonated with you, I invite you to continue reading. Leave a like to let me know this meeting resonated with you. Subscribe to continue receiving insights that can transform your relationships with others, and most importantly, with yourself. And tell me in the comments, which of these truths touched you most today? Which wound did you recognize? What courage did you feel emerging within you just now? Because sharing your story is another step on this path to being whole, and allowing others to be inspired by your courage to find their own wholeness. You deserve to be who you are, whole, seen, and loved, not in spite of who you are, but precisely because of it.